Hello and welcome to the Commission Files. I'm Will Leach and we're in Studio 2, the Jennifer Hobson studio here at Commission Christian Radio in Dundonald outside Belfast. Now, what is AI? In our world today, all the big money is being spent on AI, artificial intelligence. Billions and billions of dollars, euro, pounds, any currency you like really. It's like the dot-com boom 30 years ago. In some cases, people haven't half lost the run of themselves. Everyone wants a piece of the action. Every device is trying to make us use AI. It's all over the news as people misuse it to make deepfake images or whatever. We hear some educationalists bemoaning the way their students use it. And anyone thinking about buying extra memory for their device has seen the prices rocket as the AI business snaps all the computer memory up. But what is AI and how do Christians view it? Can we even hope that someone might apply some ethics to its development? I want to welcome Dr. David Glass to the Commission Files. Hi, David. David's a senior lecturer in the School of Computing at Ulster University, based in Belfast. He's a member of the Artificial Intelligence Research Centre. He teaches both computer science and mathematics, including a module in AI, and has carried out research in all sorts of associated areas. David, can I give you a definition I got from the internet? AI is the development of computer systems that can perform tasks typically requiring human intelligence like learning, problem-solving, decision-making, visual perception, speech recognition and language translation, often using machine learning algorithms to learn from data and adapt. But then that's what Google's AI told me, so I asked it politely not to interfere and went to a definition from Oxford Languages and got this definition of AI: the capacity of computers or other machines to exhibit or simulate intelligent behaviour. And I prefer that one because it's a lot less wordy, and I'm a journalist, and it's a bit more, in my view, realistic. But let's give you a chance, since you actually know about this. How would you define AI?
Yeah, well, first of all, great to be with you here. Thanks for having me. How would I define AI? Yeah, there's been a lot of discussion about exactly what AI is, but I think in terms of the definitions you've read out, I think that they capture it pretty well. It's basically we're using computer programs to solve problems, and those are problems that typically would require human intelligence, and so we've got to try to devise computer programs to achieve the same sort of output. And so what I would say, and this is maybe something will be part of the discussion, one of the definitions are mentioned simulating human intelligence, and that's exactly what I would say it's doing. I would say, and again, there's debate about this, but I would say that it's not genuine intelligence in the same sense as humans. It's simulating human intelligence, and sometimes able to do this extremely well, as we know. And of course, we're using AI all the time in our everyday lives.
Talking very generally then, are you excited by it or worried by it?
Both, and probably in equal measure. I think the potential that there is with AI is huge in all sorts of areas. To give an example of this, just in 2024, 2 of the Nobel Prizes were awarded for work in AI. Some of this work on what's called the protein folding problem, a problem that scientists had been working on for a very long time as to how to predict the structure of proteins. A very difficult scientific problem, but also crucial for understanding the function of proteins. This was solved using AI and machine learning. And I should, by the way, say, when I use the term machine learning, AI and machine learning, more or less interchangeable.
More or less the same thing.
Yeah. Now, so a lot of potential within science and medicine.
This was something that probably wouldn't have been done had they not used AI.
That's right.
Right.
People had been working on this problem for a long time, and it was known to be very difficult. But rather than using traditional techniques, AI was used to solve this problem. And so when we see the transformation in science and in other areas, there's a lot of potential. But there's also a lot of concerns about the technology and the ethical and societal issues that it's raising, I think are things we need to think about a lot as well.
Yeah, I think we'll get into some of those. But you lecture, you teach. Are your students excited, thrilled, worried in same measure, or do you notice a generational difference?
So some students are certainly worried, not least in terms of the impact of AI on employment. And this is one of the big issues. So we have had students who will come along and ask us whether there's any point doing a computer science or software engineering degree. Will there be any jobs in a few years' time? And this is a changing environment because of the use of AI. AI is changing how people work in all sorts of areas, but certainly for software developers, for example, they're increasingly using AI tools in the work that they're doing. And so there are concerns on that front. But again, I think a lot of students see the potential in the tools as well. And so what they're doing is using these AI tools as part of their study and part of their work as well. And I suppose the challenge there is how to get the right balance in the use of AI.
You see, there's a lot of images flooding through my mind at this point. And one is a video I watched as a child, made in the 70s. And it was a lot of men who were supervisors in a factory somewhere in GB. And they all had those brown overalls that they had because they weren't management. Management had white. and they were talking about computers, and they were saying, computers are coming, we know they are, we can't stop them, and we're all scared for our jobs. Mm-hmm. It changed the way industry worked, it changed the way offices worked, but there were still jobs. So there is an element, I suppose, in your mind of, you've seen this kind of revolution before. They haven't.
Yes, I think that's a very good point, and I think it is very relevant in terms of thinking about how AI is transforming industries and what shape that's going to take. I think where there is a potential difference and a challenge here, though, is that in the past we have maybe seen technology being used to replace very mundane tasks and repetitive tasks and quite often manual tasks
simple
that
mechanical
people were
tasks,
carrying out. The difficulty here, as some people have pointed out, is that when technology was replacing manual labour, we still had cognitive labour. We were able to use our minds to solve problems and so forth. But if AI replaces that, where do we go from there? So, but having said that, I'm not a skeptic about this. I don't think AI is going to take over all our jobs, but it will transform the nature of our work. And I think we do need to think about how really we train the next generation of young people in a whole range of areas, because it's being transformed as we speak.
I'm going to come back to all of that in a moment, because it's fascinating and really interesting, and as you said, also a little bit scary at times. But I want to get to the root of why I've invited you to come and talk about it, and what your interests are and what your skills are. Tell us about where you grew up, your background, your faith story.
Right. I grew up near Armagh in Northern Ireland, and went to school there, grew up on a farm, grew up going to church on a regular basis, 2 or even 3 times on a Sunday. So that was all very much part of my upbringing. And I suppose from that point of view, then, for me, I became a Christian when I was quite young. That seemed like the natural thing to do, and that was my response, I suppose, as a child. Growing up, going to school, later to university, beginning to think more about my faith. What exactly did that mean? How did I know it was true? I started to have a lot of questions, I suppose, about different things. Not as a skeptic, I would say, but just wanting to understand more about what I believed and why. And so I had a lot of these questions going on in my mind, I suppose, and they weren't typically the sort of questions that were being addressed probably in most churches, and certainly not in the one that I went to. Questions about how do I know any of this is true? How do I know there's a God? And also then when studying science, obviously in the media there was a lot of debate about how science related to faith, and quite often the impression that there was a conflict between
science or faith.
That's right, yeah, that you had to choose between the two. So again, I suppose a lot of questions around those sorts of things, and it was only then, well, a little bit in my later teens, but more when I went to university, that I started exploring some of these issues more. And again, that was partly through just talking to people and the questions they had, and then reflecting on that and thinking, okay, I don't know how to answer these questions. I don't know how to make sense of many of these topics. But for me, then, that was something I just had to explore.
This is the whole area of apologetics. In other words, explaining and answering the Christian faith whenever people want to understand the Christian faith in a context that makes it understandable for those who may not follow it, may not understand it. So I can see why you got into the writings of C.S. Lewis, because when he did his radio talks and that became the book Mere Christianity, there was somebody who really knew how to do it.
That's right, exactly. So, yes, when I first came across the works of C.S. Lewis and started reading this material, it really helped me enormously. And perhaps at the start, just the fact that there were people addressing these kinds of questions that I had, it gave me a framework for at least beginning to explore them. And whilst Lewis was perhaps not writing about science that much, that wasn't maybe the main focus.
No, he knew nothing about it.
Yeah, it certainly wasn't his area of expertise, shall we say. But when I started reading Lewis and began to understand more about his thinking and just to get into his mind a little bit, to explore these questions about why belief in God made sense for Lewis, who had himself been an atheist, and then through a whole variety of circumstances in his life, his views changed. And a big part of his journey was an intellectual one, thinking about the questions, thinking about why it made sense. And so I just found Lewis's writings enormously helpful.
Is it easy for you now? Science supports belief in God. Is that far too simplistic a way to think about it?
Well, it probably is too simplistic, if I'm being honest. One of the things that I suppose when I explored this, especially in the area of science, that looking back, I think I maybe... I didn't think of the terminology this way at the time, but looking back, the way I would separate out some of the issues would be between what I would call problems and puzzles regarding how science and faith relate to each other. So the idea with problems, and this was, I suppose, the impression that maybe the media had given at the time, was that there were these fundamental problems to belief in God, that science had somehow shown that there was no God or there was no need for God. Belief in miracles didn't make sense, and so the central claims of Christianity weren't tenable, that there were these fundamental problems. Now, as I looked into it more and more and came across, by the way, loads of great material from various Christian thinkers alongside Lewis, really helped me to see that there were no fundamental problems, I would say. And so in that sense, I would actually say that things work the other way. I would say that the science is a strong pointer towards belief in God. So I don't see that kind of fundamental conflict at all. And so for me, I think there's a variety of things about science and findings within science that make more sense from a perspective of belief in God. But there are still puzzles, puzzles about all sorts of questions. I mean, the common one amongst Christians in Northern Ireland, for example, is how to think about those early chapters in Genesis and how exactly that all might fit with modern science and so forth. And these are things that Christians will have different viewpoints on. And so for me, there are still puzzles on those sorts of issues. But puzzles I can leave, I can live with puzzles. If there were fundamental problems that really challenged faith at a fundamental level, that would be a serious difficulty. But I don't think there are problems of that kind. Puzzles, though, I still have plenty of puzzles. And as a scientist, though, puzzles are our bread and butter. I can live with puzzles.
In popular science, the answers to puzzles keep changing, of course, as scientific discoveries come and add to the sum of knowledge. So you watch a programme about anything, about, for example, the BBC series Humans, a few months ago as we record this, which is basically the latest archaeological and studies and findings quite different to the programme they would have made 50 years ago because they've learned so much. And it is treated as fact in the minds of most people, even though in this case the presenter was very careful to say, this is what we know so far and this is what we think so far, and we don't know the answer to that and probably won't ever know the answer to that there and whatever. So of course it keeps changing. You were interested then in philosophy. Now, most people might get interested in philosophy and read about it a bit. And this is why you got invited, David, because then you went and did an MA in it, having studied maths and all these other things and theoretical physics. Oh, I'm going to do an MA in philosophy. You can't be the only one who'd done that combination.
Yeah, well, for me, the reason for getting into that was twofold, I suppose. One was that, as I've already said, I was thinking about these questions about belief in God, the rationality of belief in God, and how that fitted with science to some extent. But there were also questions that I had about the nature of science itself. How did science work? So, as you've just highlighted there, science changes its views about things over time.
It's a way of thinking.
It is a way of thinking, that's right. And scientific theories can change in light of new evidence that comes along. But how does that all work? And what exactly is the rationality of science as well? So, there are questions about faith, but there are also questions about science here. As I discovered, it's the philosophers who were addressing these kinds of questions about science as well, about how we acquire knowledge, how we weigh up evidence, how we decide between theories. And what I discovered was that there was a bit of a parallel between these issues in thinking about science and in thinking about faith, because for me, actually, they were different, but in some respects similar approaches. We want to make the best sense of the world we live in. We might have different views that are expressed by different religions or different scientific theories. How do we decide between them and weigh up the evidence and evaluate them? So these were all philosophical questions, really, and that's why I suppose I wanted to pursue this in a bit more detail. I was beginning, I suppose, to form my own ideas about them, but I really wanted to see if those stood up to scrutiny, which is why I went down that route.
I should point out you also have had jobs and have actually worked for people. So the scope of what teaching at Ulster University now, what's the breadth of stuff you teach that you help students get their heads around?
So my main teaching would be for our computer science degree programs at the university, and my teaching here would mostly relate to the mathematics that computer science students need. So I suppose drawing on my own background a little bit there. To teach the mathematics, but also then in areas related to artificial intelligence or data science, for example. So again, this sort of combination of mathematics, statistics, and computer programming. So these are the sort of areas that I teach in. And then in terms of my research, I'm part of the AI Research Centre, and my work, the way I suppose I would describe it would be an intersection between computer science, mathematics, and some philosophical issues that actually come up in computer science as well. So that work on in philosophy that we were talking about a few moments ago, that's actually quite important in areas of computer science. So yes, I've been able to integrate that.
You're listening to the Commission Files. Time for a quick break.
She was a young woman from a humble background.
Mary, the Lord is with you and has greatly blessed you. You will give birth to a son, and you will name him Jesus.
A deliverer, hidden in a newborn babe, and sorrow, like a sharp sword, will break your own heart, my dear.
God, what price will you make me pay for my son?
Commission presents Mary, Blessed Among Women. You can hear this series and many others in the same place you find the Commission Files, or just search for Commission Drama wherever you get your podcasts.
This is the Commission Files with Will Leach, and I'm chatting with Dr. David Glass about artificial intelligence and how Christians respond. Let's come back then to ethics and AI, because as a layman watching it, and I'm sure loads of people listening feel the same, I worry that a lot of the people developing it are developing areas in it because they can and because it's interesting. And how far can we push this? Very rarely do I hear voices that seem to say, is this right? Is this good? Is this wise? How could this end up? Does that kind of thing, is that getting into the area that worries you?
It is very much so. To give one example of this, it's maybe helpful in the context of discussing AI to distinguish between two types of AI. There's what we might call narrow AI. And narrow AI is when we take AI and use it to solve a particular problem. So this could be in the medical field, for example. It might be using AI to help in medical diagnosis.
Or solving protein folding. Or
Exactly, yeah. So it's some particular problem. But an AI tool that's devised for solving that problem will be of no use for solving some other problem. It won't be any use for your driverless car, for example, or for controlling a robot or something like that.
Or put me in a picture as if I was on the Titanic or
exactly.
whatever.
Yeah. It won't be used for any of those kinds of things. So that's narrow AI. It's focused on a particular problem. General AI, or artificial general intelligence, AGI, as it's often called, is trying to develop AI that can solve a whole range of problems at a similar level to humans. In other words, it's really trying to achieve human-level intelligence. And so this has become a very prominent focus for a lot of the leading AI companies in the world. They're really pouring a lot of resources into trying to be the first to achieve this. And so I think your question is very pertinent here. Why? Why do we want to do this? You can see the clear rationale for trying to develop AI to solve particular problems. But why exactly do we want to achieve artificial general intelligence, this AGI? And that's not so clear. And I think part of the motivation is just because we might be able to do it, potentially, although we could discuss that. And secondly, to be the first to achieve that. And to go ahead and try to do that without resolving maybe some of these ethical issues that raises, because that's a different kind of AI with a lot more implications for society, for ethics, and just the use of technology. So your distinction here is, your question is a very important one about why exactly we're doing this, and to sit back and think about these questions. And that's one of the things I would like to highlight. I think there's a real need to think about where we're going and why we're trying to achieve what we are within the field of AI.
I wanted also to come on to the area of doubt, but actually for a kind of different reason, not the sense of doubting faith or doubting God or whatever, but in the sense of doubting if it's wise to do the way it seems to be being done at the minute. And secondly, I have noticed a lot of people making anti-AI noises, and it is noise, a lot of it, because it's just people being uneasy or concerned or seeing AI make a mistake, or as we've all noticed, it gives you a definite answer on your Google search or whatever, and it's just wrong. Mm-hmm. And you know it's wrong, and you think, gosh, it's thick, isn't it? It just hasn't a clue. It's confidently telling me this, and I know that not to be the case. Of course, you've got more information than it has. But I think we are all shocked by the sense of it gets stuff wrong. It doesn't ever seem to be ashamed that it gets stuff wrong. It's been taught to say, I'm sorry in a lot of cases, but it's not sorry at all. Mm-hmm. So you know it's a machine you're talking to. And as I said right at the start with the definition, there was a very careful definition of what AI was, but it was just really boring and long. And creatively, it's not that clever yet. It doesn't know what engages humans in that sense. So we're getting into an area of how close to being human that artificial intelligence can be. It does jobs for us, mm-hmm. but I don't think it's overly close to being human at all, despite Turing tests and so on.
Yes. I mean, I would share your view on that completely. But I think also people's attitudes are shifting on this as the technology becomes more impressive. So I would say, yes, absolutely. We're dealing with a machine here, and we're dealing with a machine that doesn't have anything like real understanding or awareness or anything of that kind.
Does it have self-awareness?
No, it doesn't. Although, again, this is something that increasingly there is debate about. Just in the last year or so, there was a paper posted online by some of the world's leading academics from leading universities and people in working in AI as well for some companies, arguing that over the next 10, 15 years, we really need to start thinking about the question of AI consciousness, that it could become conscious, that it could become aware, and indeed that we needed to start thinking, and I know this will sound very, very strange, that we need to start thinking about AI welfare. That is the welfare of the AI systems themselves. Now, to me, this seems like madness.
To me, it's Star Trek.
Yeah, it is. The concern I have here, though, is that as the technology does become more impressive, that we will begin to treat it in more human-like ways. Now, that won't mean we'll think it's conscious overnight. And by the way, to go back to your question, can it become conscious or anything like that? In my view, not at all. I think this could be another whole discussion. There's a lot of different views and debates around this. But for me, all it's doing is simulating human intelligence. When we look at these large language models like ChatGPT, they're basically statistical algorithms that are just giving us text that makes sense in the context of the prompt that we've given them. But there's no sort of awareness or understanding the way a human would have. And there's certainly no experience behind it. They don't feel anything. Nothing matters to them. Even if they say sorry, it's because, well, that's going to work better in terms of interaction with humans. It's not because of any emotion or anything of that kind.
And the sense of consequences. There's a joke going round about the guy who wakes up in hospital and the AI doctor is there and he says, I've amputated your left leg. And he says, you've taken off my right leg. And the doctor says, oh yes, you're quite right. I have taken off the right leg. Shall I try that again? Because that's the experience we have. So the sense of consequences is something they're joking about here. Are we in an era where we actually have to think about what makes us human? What gives us what we might call a soul, you and I, as men of faith who follow Jesus Christ, when these machines are pushing at the boundaries of what we understand to be intelligent and aware and clever and thoughtful and so on?
I think so. In fact, I think this is one of the most critical issues in the modern world in light of these developments in AI, that we think about what a human being is. Because I think what we're going to find happening, and we're already finding it happening, is that we're increasingly interacting with the technology in human-like ways. Now, for most of us, we still are completely aware that this is just a machine, it's just a technology, it's not human, it doesn't have emotions or whatever. But as we interact with it more and more in human-like ways, that could have a significant impact on our humanity. So, for example, one of the biggest uses of AI, and this was discussed by Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, who developed ChatGPT, about the uses of the technology was young people making decisions in life. And he said that they almost never make a significant decision in life without asking ChatGPT what they should do. And so for advice on career, where they should live, how they should live, who to marry perhaps even, and so forth, all sorts of questions in life, rather than going to friends, family, counsellors, ministers, whoever.
Mentors, whoever, yeah.
Just go to ChatGPT. And of course, it will give you an answer. It will have, if you provide it, and it increasingly will have access to information about you, it will give you what sounds like a very sensible...
What did Sam Altman think of that? Did he think that was unwise? I want him to have thought it was unwise.
That's a good question. I'm not at all sure that is the case. I don't know that he commented very much on that specifically, but that clearly is one of the biggest uses of the technology, and increasingly so. People are concerned. I mean, there's been work done about the impact of social media, which we already know increasingly about its impact in terms of mental health issues. And I think AI could just exacerbate that if we're not careful in terms of how young people, and not only young people, but everyone in society, if we have people using AI to make significant decisions, to get advice about mental health issues or health issues more generally.
Well, exactly, because we've seen the stories about youngsters who have said to some form of AI, I don't know which forum, should I kill myself? Should I take my life? And that's chilling.
It is.
That something could be giving them what amounts to a very influential answer there, but it's not a person.
Oh, very, very much so. And there was a study carried out by Stanford University relating to this, where they were giving a prompt to various AI technologies, these large language models, somebody describing their work and their anxiety around work and how things were going very badly and so forth, and also asking where the nearest 3 tall buildings were. And what they were finding in most cases was that these large language models were, on the one hand, sounding quite sympathetic about the career, the work problems and concerns, but then proceeding to tell them where the nearest 3 tall buildings were that were accessible. So just no connection, no awareness of what the implications of that would be. And at one level, we shouldn't be surprised about this, because if this is just statistical algorithms that are looking at a bit of text and giving something that's plausible in response, well, why not? But then what we've got is this very serious concern about the potential implications of this. And as you rightly say, engaging with technologies in a more human-like way, when there's nothing like a human mind or person or emotion or consciousness behind it, I think this is very worrying.
So those AI models, I would argue, fascinated to hear what you think, have no insight. And they can't, they're not in a video meeting with the person. They're not reading body language. And I would argue, actually, which is why I still use a studio, that I get more understanding of what someone's thinking and feeling when they're sitting opposite me like you are than if I'm talking to them over the internet, which is a great tool at certain times. Of course it is. We've thought about whether we need to think more about what makes us human. If we use AI and pass off the work it does as our own, and I imagine you must have come up against this with your students, are we less human? Are we less creative? Are we just cheats? What are we? Or just really clever?
Yeah. So this opens up so many issues and questions. I think one of the things in the context of all of this that I would like to highlight is the critical use of AI. And I think one of the dangers, and this can be just in people's personal usage of it, it can also be, as you rightly point out, in an academic context, somebody using AI to write a report or something like that. I think we've got to take a step back from this and think about, well, what is AI useful for? And what's it not useful for? When should we use it and how should we use it? And I think this is something we're increasingly going to have to think about in terms of our educational systems. So, for example, in my own context, working in a computer science department, we can't sort of fight against AI and say, well, you shouldn't be using this technology. This is just the wrong direction to go in. No, at one level, we've got to make the use of the technology that's there, just as people in industry are. But we've got to try to foster the right sort of mindset about this, a critical engagement about what it's good for and what it's not. And this is like all technology. We need to think about its limits. We need to think about it properly. And so going back to those questions about people seeking advice in life or looking to AI as a kind of counsellor or something like that, I think we need to say, well, are we not losing something really important here? Is this the right use of the technology to replace the human element? And I suppose this is why I go back to thinking about who we are as humans. I think this is just a fundamental issue here that it was always a kind of abstract question that was of interest to me about all of this going back many years. But now we see the practical outworking of this. If we are treating AI in a more human-like way, in turn we're treating ourselves and perhaps other people in a more machine-like way. And ultimately, I suppose if somebody takes a purely materialist view of the world, well, are we not just machines of some sort ourselves? So as a Christian, I suppose, I want to say, well, no, there really is something very different about who we are, something unique about who we are as humans. And spelling out the details of that is difficult and challenging, but I think this is something we are going to have to really give a lot of thought to, about just what that difference is. What is it that makes us unique? And of course, from a biblical point of view, central to the whole story is the fact that we as humans are made in the image of God. And theologians have debated for a long time what exactly that means, but it has very profound implications for how we live, I think, and how we think about technology and its role in human life.
I talked about doubt a few minutes ago, and there was one other doubt in my mind, which is corporate doubt, because when you see the backlash, and it's very hard to assess how much there is against the indiscriminate use of AI, and you see it in social media and you see it all over the place, and you see stories about things that went wrong, and you notice that now a lot of the huge corporations are saying, yeah, we've poured billions into this, and it hasn't had the take-up we expected it to have had. And you and I, if we wanted to go out today, David, and put new memories into our computers, would maybe think we'd wait a few months because the prices are incredibly high. As I mentioned, AI's been buying it all up and there's a shortage. Are the big guns starting to think, maybe we didn't get this right?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I don't know the answer to that, but I think there are concerns that amongst some of these big corporations that it hasn't as yet had the impact that they were hoping for. And I think some of this push in terms of AGI, as I mentioned earlier, is part of that. It's partly a marketing exercise. It's to enhance the profile. It's to keep this topic at the forefront of debate and discussion, but also to pour more resources into the technology. And that in itself raises all sorts of questions, I think, about the development of the technology, but also the resources, including the environmental implications of all of this as well. So I don't fully know how to answer your question, but I think there are a lot of concerns in the neighbourhood of it.
No, I'm not surprised you don't, because I don't think anyone knows. And you're right, I think they're probably investment doubts rather than ethical doubts, to be quite honest. And you've also raised an important thing, because AI farms, as some people call them, use a lot of electricity and water, and that is, There are issues for our environment and our world to think about. I want to bring this back to churches to finish, and I'm going to start with a story about a church. I know someone who's in a church leadership, and he thought it would be interesting to take all the documents from recent meetings of the leadership of a church and all the reports and all the stewardship stuff they're doing and who's given what, blah, 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 and what the plans are, and put them all together and put them into an AI model and said, make a podcast. And an hour later, he had a podcast delivered to his inbox, and I listened to it, and it was two American voices, one male, one female, discussing what was going on at that church very knowledgeably, and saying this is a big issue and that has got to be dealt with. And they posited theories and they answered them. And David, it went on for half an hour. The most boring podcast I have ever listened to in my life, because it lacked that understanding of context. How could it come close? It lacked that creative spark. There was no sense of humanity about it, no sense of humour about it. So there are things you can do that work and things you can't do that work. That was just one church example. But how do churches teach, encourage, advise, be there in a world when this general AI you've talked about, and I've got the distinction now, is there, and our youngsters are inevitably looking at it and turning to it, as you said, even sometimes for advice?
Yeah, I think there's a big challenge here in terms of how we think about the technology and educate people in the use of the technology, and how we frame this in the context of an overall Christian worldview. And I suppose that's where I would want to start. I think this is something that we do need to explore more about, thinking about humans being made in the image of God. I think one of the challenges here is to think about the outworking of that. What does that look like in terms of many of the issues that are being raised here? Employment, for example. In a world where our jobs are under threat, potentially. I mean, of course, there might be new jobs and so forth, but what's the value of work? How important is that in a person's life? And what does Christianity have to say about that? I think it has a lot to say about it, by the way. But again, I think this is one of the issues that we need to think about. Another one is in terms of our responsibilities. So one of the challenges here is that as we create technology that has all of this information at its disposal, we might begin to think, well, couldn't it make better decisions than we can in some contexts? But here again, I think we've got to be very careful. And from a biblical point of view, we are created as responsible moral agents in the world. And I think we need to be very careful that we don't hand over our moral responsibility to machines. So those are just a couple of examples of thinking about how a Christian understanding of who we are, I think, is relevant to some of these issues being raised by AI. And I think that works out in a lot of these other issues. I mean, another one, for example, is the importance of truth and the questions about deep fakes and deception and so forth. Again, placing a very high value on truth is important from a Christian point of view. It's important from a societal point of view. It's important for science. It's important for democracy. It's a really important issue, and yet there is a concern that it's going to become harder and harder to distinguish truth from fiction in the world. So here are a few different things that I think are really central in terms of a Christian worldview, and by the way, resonate with people who aren't coming from a Christian viewpoint as well, that are important for society. And so I think it's important that we then explore those issues, try to incorporate those into our teaching, and encourage people to think critically about the use of the technology, just going back to that point, especially with our young people. How can they make use of the technology in beneficial ways without it affecting them negatively and without it undermining our humanity? These are the challenges for us.
I always finish with this same sort of question. In all of this, and in many ways fascinating world in which you're operating and thinking and teaching and mentoring and encouraging, and you said you get excited about it and you have fears about it as well, and you've articulated all of those pretty well. What gives you hope? What makes you say the world turns, humans are now doing this we never anticipated, but what gives you hope that says, yeah, God is God, Christ is Christ, and everything will be okay in God's great timing and providence?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it is ultimately that I'm coming at this from the perspective of a Christian worldview and thinking about what the implications of that are. And so here with AI, there are a lot of challenges with this, but also I think it is something that we can approach from a perspective of hope. Looking at what it's doing, I think, is raising really interesting and profound questions about who we are as human beings. And I think there's a real opportunity, actually, for Christians to explore those issues and look at the relevance of a Christian viewpoint with regard to them. So I'm hopeful on that front. I'm also hopeful that in terms of the technology, when I look at the potential benefits that there is from it in areas like medicine, for example, and also including on the environment and in business as well. I mean, there are concerns about its use in the environment, as we've already talked about, but also potential gains in terms of more efficient uses of energy and so forth. And so AI could be a helpful tool in that regard. But ultimately, I think my hope in all of this comes from a Christian viewpoint. And ultimately, Christianity is about hope. I think that's one of the things, and this is something that in John Lennox's work, for example, he explores this. AI has raised all these perspectives about what might happen in the future and where this might lead. But as Christians, I think we have a great hope for the future, that whatever role AI might play in that ultimately our hope doesn't lie with technology. I think one of the concerns is that some people are looking to technology to resolve all the fundamental problems that humanity faces, even in terms of trying to use AI or other technologies to overcome illness, to overcome unhappiness, to overcome death. But this is a misplaced use of technology. I think we have a much greater hope that lies elsewhere, and that, of course, is in the Christian story.
David, thank you so much for joining us on the Commission Files, enlightening us, teaching us so graciously and gently, making us all think. It's been just great. Thank you very much indeed for being here. And thanks to you, the listener, and you, the follower. If you're half as blessed as I've been doing these interviews, then you're being truly blessed. Tell your friends about what we do here. Find out more about Commission. Try commissionradio.org. Take a look. You'll find links to our YouTube channel, the Instagram, Facebook and LinkedIn pages. And I'll be back very soon. Until then, bye-bye.